Hi everybody, my name is Justin Sider. I'm the Chief Information Officer at Belay Technologies. Welcome to VMworld 2021. This is a Code Connect conference session. This is Code 2744. Title is Loop, Swoop, and Pull. PowerCLI will be as easy as tying your shoes. Today I'm going to go over multiple different ways to perform the same task using different loops inside of PowerShell. This is going to greatly increase your aptitude at PowerShell. Alright, standard disclaimer for VMware. Good news, I don't have any forward-facing stuff here. This is all about stuff you can use now within PowerShell. Alright, who am I? I am Justin Sider. I'm an avid PowerShell programmer. Chief Information Officer at Belay Technologies. We do a lot of automation and software programming. I have a personal blog, invoke-automation.blog. You can find me on GitHub, Twitter, Slack, basically JP Sider, anywhere you can find me. New hashtag this year is Preach PowerCLI. Make sure you guys are spun up and getting ready to use all of your new skills. Alright, so this is just an in case of emergency presentation. So I like to call it ICE. So I'm going to go over each of the different types of loops that you have in PowerShell and whether I like them, whether I don't like them. And what you're going to see through this demonstration is we're going to create 5 VMs, and we're going to create those 5 VMs multiple different ways. So I'm going to kind of fly through the slides I have. I only have like 6 or 7 slides just to show you the data. And then we'll actually get into the live demo portion. So here's a for loop. I never use a for loop when I'm programming in PowerShell. If I was using batch, I would probably do it, or shell, or like bourne shell or something like that, bash. But in PowerShell, I never use them. But they are there. You can use them. Here you can see we have the for, and then basically setting up the iteration, and then inside the brackets, the curly brackets, we're setting the name of the VM and then running the command to create the new VM. All right, for each object, I also very rarely use these, right? See, these are more going to be for your one-liners, right? I want to create the coolest, longest one-liner. I don't ever want to write, reusable code. They definitely have their place. Today, again, I'm not going to talk about aliases. I'm going to write everything out for you guys, so you get to see the full aspect of what's going on. One note here that I actually screwed up on is the curly bracket has to be on the same line as for each, or otherwise PowerShell won't know what to do with it. So take a look here. You can see a lot of these things are going to look similar as we kind of go through this, but as we go through, you'll get to see some subtle differences, and I'll talk about why I might choose this one over another one. All right, for each, this is probably my bread and butter. This is a loop that I use almost every single day when I'm writing. This is going to be the first thing I do in order to break down information that I'm trying to capture. So you see the first thing there is we set the number list, and this could be any command, right? If I'm doing a get VM and I'm separating based on name, what case might be, I'm starting off with something I know, and I'm going to loop through each one of those things. It gets a little confusing when I'm teaching PowerShell. I sometimes get some feedback that people don't understand where this first $ number comes from, and this is really just something that you make up. So you're saying for each item in this list, so each number in this list, and then I'm going to iterate through each one of those. You'll see this in action in a few minutes. All right, while, not my favorite, and the reason it's not my favorite is that you need to, you may never enter into this code, and that may or may not be a good thing based on what you're trying to accomplish. So here we set the number of maximum VMs. We have a VM count. We're starting at 1, and then while that count is less than number of 5, we're gonna run this code. But if you never meet this criteria, this code will never execute. So that can be confusing, and I think that is kind of the reason I stay away from this one. All right, do while. This is an excellent choice. This is something that you are going to run, and it's always going to run at least one time. So you have a number of VMs is set to 5. We're going to set that VM count to 0, and we're going to say do this code while this is true. So we're going to run this while our VM count is less than the number of VMs. So the reason this is really nice is that it does run the first time. You may not want it to run the first time, which is why we have the do while, or do the while loop. It really comes down to personal preference and how you want the code to react. All right, we have do until. So this is very similar to do while, except that last statement down here is going to be qualified a little bit differently. So we're going to say do this until you reach this number, right? Instead of while something is true. So it's really similar. It just depends on how you have this qualifying statement down here, but you can perform the same work. All right, the last thing is break, and this is a great way to stop a loop. This probably isn't the best example of using break in order to stop something, but I wanted to make sure that for this purpose, for this presentation, that I'm showing you how to create 5 VMs using PowerShell loops in different ways, right? So we're going through each individual loop type and we're creating 5 VMs. So what you can do is basically break out of any loop. So whether it's a while loop or for each loop, once you determine how you want to break out of that, here we're qualifying it based on what the number is. You can see that the number list up here I set to 50. So as we loop through each one, we get to 1, we get to 2, 3, 4. As we get to 5, it'll run the command and then it breaks. So maybe I want to put this before 5. Again, this is a bad example only because I would just set this number list to 5. But either way, you have it. I'm showing you how to use it, and you'll see it in action here in a minute. All right, so here we're going to get to live demos. Just so you know, I'm going to leave this up for a couple seconds. All of this code is available on GitHub. If you go into Invoke Automation and then go down to my PowerCLI and then VMworld 2020. So I've separated these out individually by scripts. I've also given you a script that will set up the entire environment once you've connected into vCenter or you have a vCenter available. I'm not working with any actual VMs. There's no operating system on these VMs. I just wanted to show you, the power of the PowerShell loops without even having to worry about what the operating system is. Please take the survey at the end of the presentation. It's always useful to get some feedback and let us know how we did and what we can improve upon. All right, well, thank you. Here we go, live code. Cool. All right, so on the right-hand side of my screen here, you can see that I have my vCenter. What I've done with this initial create environment script, there's a lot of stuff here. I'm going to connect into my vCenter. I'm setting my host to 203. I have 2 hosts in my little home lab. And then I'm basically setting up all the different properties to create a VM. The nice thing is, if you watched my presentation last year, I used the code capture. So what I did is I actually captured this code all the way down to here in order to create a VM. The VM name is right here. We're calling it base. And then we're going to wait a couple seconds, and then we're going to take a snapshot. The reason we're taking the snapshot is so that I can do linked clones and everything goes really fast today. So you can see the base VM here, and if I click on this and I do, let's see, snapshots, manage snapshots, I'll pull it into frame here. And you can see I have a base VM with a base snapshot, not to confuse you at all. All right, let's move this off the side here a little bit. All right, so the first guy I'm going to touch was that for loop. So here we go. We have our standard for loop here, nothing too crazy. We set up the iteration loop. We say as long as it's less than 5, we're going to increase that count, and we're going to execute the code. You'll also notice that I'm old school. I like to run things in my own PowerShell command. I've changed my console title there. All right, here's our loop. I'll move this over so you can see the VMs get created here on the right-hand side. And as you can see, we go through and we test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? So I kind of caught myself, right? So one of the things you need to be aware of when you're doing looping and you're checking for properties is that the index starts at 0, right? So that means that if you're counting from 0, you're always going to count that 0. So if you want 5 machines, you really need to set that less than 4 or start counting at 1. So what we're going to do is we'll clean this up real quick. We'll get rid of those VMs. You can see that they're all gone now. Maybe I can make this a little better. See if we can do it this So the other thing that did is it also created a lot of kind of output here, and maybe we don't necessarily want that. So what I'm going to do is clean that up and also make sure we only get 5 VMs this time. So here you can see I started counting at 1 versus the 0. And then we're saying still less than 5, and then I've outputted everything to null. Here we go, the VMs will start popping in. And you can see I named them a little something different. So now you can see there was no output generated from the command because I'd used out null. So this may be good or not good. It really depends on what you're trying to get out of your PowerShell coding. So we're going to clean those up. And they're gone. And now you'll see a for loop, and I'm going to have some output, some manually generated output. So now you can see I have that creating VM, and then I pipe out the name. So this can be useful. Maybe you want to, know the time or know anything that went on during that time frame. So you could add in a timestamp. You could add in any other notes that you wanted to add. So for me, this is really helpful as I'm writing PowerShell to make sure I'm getting output from the programs I'm writing and know where maybe my code breaks, rather than just writing one big long one-liner like I do for the cleanup. So if one of these failed to clean up, I wouldn't get any feedback that would be useful. All right, so I don't like to spend a lot of time on for loops because, like I say, I never actually use the for loop. All right, jumping ahead, we are jumping to for each. All right, so right here we have a quick generation of a number. This puts the numbers into an array, and then for each of those numbers in the array, we're going to be doing some work. So this is the shortest way you can kind of do this. And here we are doing the for each. So for each one of those items in that list, we are going to be creating a VM. And you'll see this is very similar to the for loop. All right, and you can see here we have 5 VMs, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We got the same output we got before, which is kind of ugly. I don't really care about these things. So what we'll do is we'll clean these up. And then I want my own output to be in there. So we'll do 6 through 10. Cool. And you can see, again, I have my own output. I'm not getting the generated output from PowerCLI. So let's clear this out. One thing to note here is I did put in my code comments that this opening bracket has to be on this for each line, otherwise we'll get an error. And it's not really so much an error, it's just going to start asking me questions. It's going to start prompting me to add data in. So make sure for this specific command, if you're using it, go ahead and put that opening bracket on the first comment there, or first line. All right. For each, this is my bread and butter. This is something that I use almost every single day, right? So I'm going to go out, I'm going to hit VMware and get a list of VMs, and then for each one of those VMs, right, just the full language of how it sounds makes sense to me. And whether I'm hitting a REST endpoint and getting back a data collection, whether I'm doing it from VMware, I want to make sure that the code I'm writing makes sense. So we're doing the same thing. We're generating that number list, 1.5. That creates an array. I store that array in this number list, and then I'm saying for each one of those numbers, go ahead and perform this code. You can see I already have my comment in there that I'm going to write out. Oh, I never deleted the old VMs. Let's delete those first. They're gone. You notice everything goes really, really fast when you don't have an operating system or actually any space. So let's create these VMs real quick. And you'll see they get created pretty quick. We have that same user-driven output here. And then we'll go ahead and delete these. Cool. So for each, again, my bread and butter, I use this all the time. It's extremely helpful as I'm writing code to just understand how well that PowerShell does that verb-noun context. As I read the code, it makes sense. All right, we're going to jump into while. Now here we go. So this will only run the code inside the loop if this statement right here is true. If the VM count is less than the number of VMs. So what we'll do is we will set this to true right now. So the VM count, which is 0, it's going to be less than 5. So as we go through this, this will create all of the VMs. All right, so now if I wanted to run this code again, right, so $VM count, you notice that it's 5, okay? So if I wanted to run this code again, and I'm not resetting the variables, notice that nothing happens, right? So this code will never run unless you actually meet this statement. So it's a really good way to avoid running code, but it's not a really good way of running code. And generally, you know, you would almost write an if, right? I think an if would work just as good to determine whether or not you wanted to run a piece of code. But I think that gets into some semantics of, you know, how you want to write your code, how do you want to evaluate your code, and what makes sense. I think the if might be a little out of context as well. So do while is probably a little bit better of a choice. But just be warned that it will run that first time. So here we have the number of VMs. So actually this is a good point. So $VM count, since I haven't reset anything, it's 5. If I run this, it'll create number 5. And actually if I continue to do that, it'll continue to run. So now it'll create 6. And so on and so forth, right? Because the $VM count is not being reset. So now it's set at 7, it would create VM number 7. So this is kind of interesting because it's always going to run that first time and then it would increase count. But what we want to do is want to be careful with that. So we'll delete those out and then you can see what it looks like when we run it the first time. You notice I have my commenting in there, so you'll get feedback, and we're creating VM test 0, creating test 1, and so on. See, we never got to test 5, right? So we're actually indexing back to 0. All right, all the VMs are gone. All right, we're at the last loop that we have, minus the break. And this is a do until. And again, we're just changing the qualifying statement here. Here we have run this code until the VM count equals number of 5. If we go back to the do while, we have do this while that number is less than the number of VMs. So it's really just it's a language thing. It's whatever you're more comfortable with. I would say that I never use do until. And I think that's just because while sounds so much better as I speak it into existence. So we'll create these VMs. You can see them created over here. You can see we had the right output, creating the text output. We have out null, so we're not getting all the feedback from PowerCLI. All right, the last thing I have here is our break. And you can see what we have here is I've set my number list to 50. And then for each of those numbers in the number list, I'm going to run this code. But what you don't know is that I've set the word break in here once we get to 5. So maybe I say 25, right? Let's have a little fun. So what this is going to do is going to loop through each one of these and create a VM. And then once we get to 25, it's going to break. So you'll see that I didn't delete the VMs out the last time, and I got a nice error here. So that's exciting. Notice my code didn't break. That's also exciting. I'm going to expand this up a little bit so you can see what's going on. And it's going through creating all those VMs for us. So it's pretty quick. It tells you exactly what it's doing as we iterate through each one. And here, I'm going to go through and delete all of these. One thing you need to be aware of through PowerShell and piping, um, there's a for each kind of already built in to piping. So just be aware, for each object, when we say right here, so this remove VM, it's accepting that, and then for each of those objects, it's removing the VM. So, you're kind of getting some of this stuff built in, and you may not even know it. All right, I'm going to get rid of all those VMs. Very cool. So we kind of went through quickly each of the different types of loops, and I could probably spend a half hour on each different one, giving you the ins and outs and examples of when I may use it, when I may not use it. Hopefully the language, as you walk through each one of these loops, it kind of speaks to you in its own way, and helps you from a reading aspect, which one makes the most sense. If I'm doing this and I'm creating VMs, and I was given a list of either the name or the number or the IP address, I'd probably use a for each. So that to me makes the most sense. It's my favorite loop, and I think that it gives the consumer or you as a coder the best English narrative as you're writing your code. It's not to say that all these other ones aren't useful, but for creating VMs I would use for each. Now one of the things that I would do a lot is a while loop. So what I might do is perform a do while loop for powering the VM on and waiting for VMware tools. So I might execute a start VM, and then, or I might check if the VM is on, then I might start it, and then if VMware tools is not running, I might do a sleep, and then once that loop is over and I've seen that VMware tools is running, I will stop that loop and move on to my next task. Maybe that's running a script inside the guest. It really depends. So whiles are great for waiting for something to happen. I would say normally time-based, not always just counter-based. But every loop has its purpose, and hopefully through the example here you can see how to use it to do the same task within multiple loops. I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in today. VMworld 2021, fantastic event online. Code Connect, really like to thank the entire VMware Code team for putting this together. Always enjoy doing live demonstrations, and enjoy the rest of the show.